Hey everyone, welcome back. Gabriella Huffman here to help you study for your North Carolina real estate exam. We are still going over chapter 7. This is video 2 of 5. So again, chapter 7 is discussing real estate brokerage and the law of agency. So we're going to talk about agency, the different classifications, how we create agency, and how we terminate agency. So again, this is video 2 of 5. So there are 3 different agency classifications: universal, general, and special. Universal is like power of attorney. You're given full power as the agent to act on behalf of your client. This doesn't happen as often, but it can. The 2 most common scenarios you're going to experience and be tested on will be general and special. So general agency can be broken down into 2 types. Number 1, the most common example would be a property manager is a general agent to a landlord. So when you see or hear general agency, I think about a general manager of a restaurant. That general manager is in charge of all the day in, day out of that restaurant. They're acting as if they are the restaurant owner, but to a certain or limited capacity. So that's what a property manager does for the landlord. They find tenants, they execute leases, they do evictions, they do all of this as if they are the landlord, but again, to a certain extent. If the place happens to burn down or there's major cost involved for repairs or improvements, that's when you will call on the landlord. Other than those extreme examples, that property manager is a general agent to the landlord, or like I like to think, a general manager running the place. The second type of scenario is a real estate agent. A licensee is a general agent to their employing firm. So whenever you sign with a firm, you are a general agent. So whenever you hire buyers or sellers, you put people in agency agreements or in contracts, you're doing all of that on behalf of the firm. And that's what we're going to see in the next slides, is that when a buyer works with you as an agent or when a seller works with you as an agent, they're actually hiring the firm. So a licensee is a general agent to their employing firm. They're doing all this underneath or behalf of their firm. Special agency will be that limited authority that you have with that buyer or with that seller. So when you do have a buyer, you have one job, which is to help that buyer find a house to buy. When you work with a seller, you have one job to help that seller sell their house. So a real estate agent can be a general agent, an employee of their firm, and a special agent, someone who works with a buyer or seller at the same time. So, real estate agent will always be a general agent to their firm. And once they start getting buyers and sellers, they also become a special agent. So, creation of agency agreements, I just picked the most common ones that you're going to see on exams. So, a listing agreement. Remember, this is between the seller and the firm. They're actually hiring the firm to list the house. You, as a real estate agent, will be a general agent who's assigned from that firm as also as a special agent to list that property for sale. So technically, the agent who's being hired to list a house is the firm. Buyer agency, same concept, but with a buyer. A buyer is going to hire the firm who's the agent to help them find a house to buy. Dual agency, we're going to get into all of that in the next video, but for now, we're going to keep it simple. Same firm, agent, same transaction. What this means is the buyer has a contract with, let's say, ABC Realty, and the seller also has a contract with ABC Realty. So the buyer and seller are both being represented by the same firm for the same transaction. Property management, the owner of the property hires the property management firm. That is how agency is created. And remember, the perfect example of that would be a general agent. A property manager is a general agent to the owner landlord. How you terminate agency agreements, fulfillment of purpose. If you are a listing agent and you sell the house, you have done your job. Therefore, your agency terminates. You are no longer needed. Same thing with a buyer. If you are a buyer's agent, you've been hired to find a buyer house, and that buyer actually buys, closes on the house, you have fulfilled your purpose. Agency is terminated. Expiration or termination of the agency agreement. So property management agreements are unique. They can have automatic renewal clauses, property management agreements. But a buyer's agreement with a buyer and a listing agreement with a seller do not have automatic renewal clauses or extension clauses. They do expire, they do terminate. So whenever you do sign a buyer or sign a seller, you're going to have to put in there for how long you're going to work with them, and then that's it. So if you wanted to continue working with them after that expiration, you'd have to sign a brand new agency agreement. So buyer agreements, listing agreements do not automatically renew, they do automatically expire. The client, whether that's the buyer, seller, property manager with that firm, they both can decide to mutually agree to part ways. There may be a breach by one of the parties, whether that's the buyer with the firm or the seller with the firm. When you go through your book, it details the duties of the client and the duties of the firm. So if any of those duties are not followed through, that is considered a breach. Operation of law, perfect example, if I'm listing a house and the seller then loses the house in foreclosure, well, the seller no longer owns that property, the bank does. So my contract or agency agreement with the seller is no longer in play because now the new owner is the bank. Destruction or condemnation of property will terminate a listing agreement. So if the property is destroyed or taken by the local government, there is no more listing agreement. It's done. What I was trying to list for sale is no longer available. Now, keep in mind that destruction of the property will not terminate a buyer's agreement. So if I have a buyer and we're under contract with a house and the house burns down, that doesn't terminate my buyer's agreement. We're just going to go find another house. So destruction and condemnation of the property only terminates a listing agreement. Death or incapacity of either party will terminate a agency agreement, whether it's a listing agreement or a buyer's agreement or property management. But keep in mind that death of the agent does not terminate an agreement. So if I'm a listing agent with ABC Realty and I die, the listing agreement is still in play because remember, the seller didn't hire me, they hired ABC Realty. So remember that last slide, when a buyer or seller is hiring an agent, they're actually hiring the firm. And then I'm going to be assigned to facilitate it. Same thing if I have a buyer. If I'm a buyer's agent and I pass away or I go insane, then the buyer's agreement is still in play because the buyer is actually in contract with my firm, ABC Realty. And then death of a sole practitioner will terminate. So if I am just Gabriella Huffman, broker, I'm not a firm entity, which we'll talk about that later. If it's just me as a sole proprietor, sole practitioner, and I'm working with a buyer or seller and I pass away, well, there it is. We're all done. It does not hand off to anybody because there is no one else to hand it off to. So anything in red, which is pretty much all of it, are really hot items for the exam and really things you need to understand when you start practicing brokerage. All right, that concludes video 2 of 5. So keep an eye out which videos you're looking for. Next, we're going to get into the different types of agency, so stay tuned.